There is a cup of coffee on my desk right now. It cost me about 40 cents to make. The cup is warm, the smell is familiar, and everything about it feels harmless. But for most of the last 500 years, the people who controlled coffee understood something the people drinking it often did not. Coffee was never only a drink. It was a way to control access, rooms, land, labor, and eventually prices. The bean is almost incidental. The control is the whole story. If you have seen a coffee history video before, there is a good chance it opened with a goat. The story says an Ethiopian herder named Kaldi noticed his goats dancing after eating red berries, tried the fruit himself, and discovered coffee. It is simple, visual, memorable, and probably not true in the form we keep repeating. The earliest known written version appeared centuries after coffee was already being consumed, and even the name Kaldi seems to have been attached later. The dancing goat is the beaver butt vanilla of coffee. It is the bright handkerchief the magician waves with one hand so you stop watching the other. Because whether one specific goat herder existed is not the important question. The important question is what people did the moment coffee became valuable. They did not simply celebrate it, they tried to own it. And once I started looking at coffee through that lens, the whole story rearranged itself. When one method of control breaks, another replaces it. First, control the plant, then control the room where people drink it, then control the land and the bodies that produce it. And once those methods become too visible, control the price so quietly that it starts to look like nature. The first version of this happened around Yemen and the port of Mocha. For generations, Yemen sat at the center of the coffee trade, linking the Red Sea, the Ottoman world, and eventually Europe. A famous account says exporters roasted, parched, or boiled beans before they left so they could be brewed but could not germinate. I want to be careful here because the exact enforcement is difficult to reconstruct, and later coffee histories often repeat the story more confidently than the evidence allows. But the commercial logic is unmistakable. Sell the customer the product, but never the means to reproduce it. It is biological digital rights management. You are allowed to consume the file. You are not allowed to copy it. A merchant in Cairo, Istanbul, Venice, or London could buy the bean, roast it, grind it, boil it, and sell the drink. But if the seed was dead, that merchant could not become a grower. The product traveled, the power stayed home. This sounds like trivia, but it is not. The first great commercial system built around coffee was organized around a very modern idea. Do not merely sell what people want. Build the product so wanting it keeps them dependent on you. Then seeds and seedlings escaped through trade, diplomacy, theft, and smuggling. The monopoly began to crack, and when rulers could no longer control coffee by trapping the plant, they started trying to control the people around it. In 1511, authorities in Mecca prohibited coffee and targeted the places where it was consumed. Later, Ottoman rulers repeatedly restricted coffee houses, and stories about Sultan Murad IV describe punishments so extreme that historians treat some details cautiously. In England, Charles II issued a proclamation in December 1675 ordering coffee houses suppressed, then retreated before the closure properly took hold. A century later, Frederick the Great turned coffee into a state-controlled luxury in Prussia and employed retired soldiers to detect illegal roasting by smell. Around 400 of these coffee sniffers became human surveillance equipment for a tax monopoly. Placed side by side, these stories sound like a montage of eccentric rulers losing arguments with breakfast, but that misses the structural point. The authorities were not really afraid of a brown liquid. They were afraid of what happened when people bought one. Coffee houses gathered merchants, writers, clerks, sailors, students, political opponents, and professional gossips into the same room. The drink kept them alert, but the room connected them. News moved through those rooms. Prices moved through those rooms. Criticism moved through those rooms. In London, the price of admission could be a penny, which is why coffee houses were sometimes called penny universities. You could enter, listen, argue, read notices, meet strangers, and learn things that had not passed through a pulpit, a palace, or an official proclamation. That was the danger. Coffee did not intoxicate people into silence. It made them sober, awake, together, and difficult to supervise. Control mechanism number 2 was not really a ban on caffeine. It was an attempt to regulate association. When power could not control the bean, it tried to control the room. But the bans kept failing because merchants wanted the trade, governments wanted the taxes, workers wanted the stimulation, and customers wanted the conversation. So power changed strategies again. It stopped trying to prevent coffee from spreading. It began trying to own the places where coffee could grow. The story of Gabriel de Clieu is usually told told like an adventure film. A French naval officer obtains a coffee seedling from Paris, carries it across the Atlantic in the 1720s, protects it from storms and shortages, and shares his water ration with the plant before reaching Martinique. Some parts come from Declieu's own later account, and coffee may already have been growing elsewhere in the Caribbean, so the heroic version deserves caution, but the seedling matters because of what came after it. Once European empires learned to reproduce coffee in tropical colonies, the old geographic monopoly was broken. That sounds like freedom. It was not. The control simply moved from the seed to the plantation. Coffee spread through Martinique, Saint-Domingue, Java, Suriname, and eventually Brazil inside colonial systems built to extract as much value as possible from land controlled by distant owners. The bean was now alive and abundant. The worker became the restricted resource. In 19th century Brazil, coffee expanded on enormous fazendas powered by enslaved labor. Between 1801 and 1851, roughly 1.5 million Africans were forcibly brought into Brazil, most into the southeastern provinces where coffee was accelerating. By the middle of the century, Brazil supplied about half of the world's coffee. Those facts belong together because one helped make the other possible. Brazilian coffee was not a miracle of soil alone. It was a system that allowed landowners to command land, transport, credit, law, and human beings at the same time. And this is the part I keep coming back to. When the living plant escaped Yemen, we might expect the story to become more open and competitive. Instead, abundance made the system larger. The monopoly on the seed weakened, but the capacity for violence expanded. Breaking one monopoly did not remove control. It moved control lower down the chain, onto people with less power to resist it. If you saw my video about bananas, this is the same machine 400 years earlier. A crop becomes globally desirable. Capital concentrates around the land. Transport networks move the crop outward. Law protects the owner more reliably than the worker, and the finished product arrives in a rich country looking clean, cheap, and disconnected from the conditions that made it possible. Cheap is not a natural quality. Cheap is a place where the cost got moved to. With coffee, the cost was moved into stolen freedom, exhausted soil, shortened lives, and labor treated as replaceable. You would think this is the dark part, and then the system slowly becomes fairer. It does become less visible. That is not the same thing. Today, much of the world's Arabica coffee is priced in relation to the New York C contract, while Robusta is commonly referenced against the London market. Those benchmark prices appear on screens thousands of kilometers from many of the farms whose survival depends on them. The farmer does not choose what rent, fertilizer, transport, food, or school costs, but the price offered for the crop can still be pulled downward by global supply, currencies, financial trading, weather forecasts, inventories, and decisions made far beyond the farm. This is what control looks like after it learns to wear a suit. No sultan needs to ban the room. No port needs to sterilize the seed. No plantation owner needs legal ownership of every worker. The market can distribute pressure across so many institutions that nobody appears to be holding the weapon. And yet millions of small-scale coffee farmers still face low, unpredictable prices while the drink becomes more expensive and elaborate at the consumer end. The cup on my desk may contain beans that pass through a farmer, local buyer, mill, exporter, importer, roaster, distributor, and retailer before reaching me. Every step can add cost and capture value. The person who grew the plant is often the person with the weakest ability to wait, store the crop, hedge the price, negotiate the contract, or walk away. There is a word for this, and it changes how you see the system. It is asymmetry. The buyer may have information, credit, storage, lawyers, multiple suppliers, and time. The farmer may have coffee cherries ripening now. That difference is power. Sometimes it looks like a perfectly ordinary contract signed by two parties who are technically free. One party can survive saying no, the other cannot. Yemen boiled the bean. Rulers banned the room. Empires controlled the land and the bodies. And today, much of the control happens through a benchmark price that presents itself as neutral. The control became so efficient that it turned invisible. It became the market. This is also why the modern coffee shelf is covered in stories. Single origin, natural process, shade grown, artisan roasted, farm selected, fair trade. Some labels represent real differences, real work, and genuine attempts to return more value to producers. I do not want to flatten them into one cynical marketing trick. But but the abundance of language around the cup tells us something. The farther consumers are from production, the more the product needs a story to cross the distance. We cannot inspect the wage, contract, debt, land title, or bargaining power inside a roasted bean. So we inspect the bag. We look for mountains, handwritten names, certification marks, altitude numbers, tasting notes, and photographs of farmers. Sometimes those signals help. Sometimes they mainly make the buyer feel that the invisible part has been handled. That is the final form of control in this story. Not control over the seed or the room, but control over what the consumer is able to see. A beautiful narrative can become the modern version of the sterilized bean. It gives us the finished experience while keeping the productive system difficult to inspect or challenge. The coffee tastes transparent. The supply chain remains opaque. I am still going to drink the cup on my desk. Stopping would not untangle 5 centuries of land, labor, trade, and finance. But I look at it differently now. The question is no longer just, is this coffee good? I ask, who had the power to say no? While this coffee moved toward me, could the farmer reject the price? Could the worker leave the job? Could the cooperative store the harvest? Could the buyer switch suppliers without pain? Could I verify the story printed on the bag? That question is more useful than trying to divide every cup into morally pure or contaminated. Supply chains are rarely that clean. The point is to find where choice disappears, because that is usually where control is hiding. And once you see the pattern, you see it everywhere. Cocoa priced far from cacao farms, clothing sold with a lifestyle but without a wage history, phones marketed through design while the mineral chain stays invisible. The commodity changes, the mechanism keeps returning. Someone controls access, someone controls information, someone has time, someone else has something perishable and a bill due tomorrow. The market calls both of them participants. History tells us they are not participating on equal terms. That 40-cent cup is getting cold now. It still looks ordinary. That may be the most disturbing part. 500 years of monopolies, bans, plantations, forced labor, surveillance, branding, and financial abstraction can disappear into something small enough to hold with one hand. This is the pattern I keep finding whenever I pull something out of the kitchen and take it apart. The price on the shelf and the price of the thing are not the same number. Cheap is just a place where the cost got moved to, and coffee has been moving it quietly for centuries. The drink was never the point. The control was. I explore one of these stories every week. If this one stayed with you, tell me which form of control surprised you most, and I will see you in the next one.